sleuthing, secrets, and of course, suspense. For readers of the mystery genre, these words have become synonymous with one man, the late, great, mercurial mastermind, Sherlock Holmes. We're here to answer the mother of all mysteries. Who, or what, inspired Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's charismatic detective, who's blessed book pages for over 130 years? Well, Watson, the game is officially afoot. An elementary misconception about Sherlock Holmes is that he was the first popular detective character of the mystery genre. But truth is, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was actually inspired by the OG detective of mystery lit, C. Auguste Dupin. Dupin, created by Goth author and poet Edgar Allan Poe, first graced the page in 1841 as a sleuth who solved crimes through his creative imagination, often putting himself in the mindset of the perp. Yeah, so he was also Criminal Minds before Criminal Minds. Arthur picked up a lot of what Poe was putting down and applied a suspicious amount of his formula to his own work. Tales of Holmes and Dupin tend to follow a pretty similar pattern. They begin with the arrival of a message about the crime. Holmes and Dupin, neither of who are professional detectives, but rather gentlemen of leisure, are sucked into the investigation. The actual police are incredibly inept, and Holmes/Dupin instead find an unexpected and improbable solution. Finally, in the big reveal, the main characters and their companions reconstruct the events to unmask the true killer. Okay, fine. Unlike Scooby-Doo, they're not always in a mask. As characters, Holmes and Dupin also had a lot in common. You might even say that in a fictional parallel universe, they'd be the best of friends. Both have quirky interests, are knowledgeable in strange and trivial matters, belong to the upper class, and treat crime solving as a hobby, much like many of the armchair detectives on Reddit today. Oh, and they both had a sidekick who served as the narrator of the story. Because what's a Holmes without his Watson? While there's clearly a lot of similarities, it doesn't mean Arthur Conan Doyle straight up stole from Poe, at least not entirely. Sherlock Holmes had a lot of unique traits that made him the iconic character that we know today. After all, you don't see a new box office hit starring C. Auguste Dupin every year. In his very first Sherlock Holmes story, A Study in Scarlet, Doyle very candidly mentions both Dupin and Monsieur Lecoq, a character created by French writer Émile Gaboriau, as his inspirations. The similarities in dialogue between Monsieur Lecoq and Sherlock Holmes are easy to notice, but what's even more obvious is Lecoq's relationship with his mentor, Tabaret. No, he's not another version of Watson. Tabaret actually appears to be more reminiscent of Sherlock's brother, Mycroft, who acts as an on-again, off-again frenemy. But just as Monsieur Lecoq was based off an actual person, Sherlock's beginnings weren't entirely fictional. Many point to Victorian-era police officers like Francis Tanky Smith of Leicester or Jerome Caminada of Manchester as the real-life versions of Sherlock Holmes. And like our oddball hero, they both had a habit of disguising themselves to investigate crime, going undercover, before it was the norm. But since Sherlock Holmes was definitely not a pro-policeman, it's unlikely they played more than a small role in the creation of the 221B Baker Street detective. The real culprit came from his own life. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was born in Edinburgh, Scotland, into a family of artists. This might sound like the perfect upbringing for a legendary author, but Arthur initially had no interest in creative pursuits whatsoever. Instead, he wanted to be a doctor. But as fate would have it, if Sir Arthur hadn't decided to pursue a medical education, he would never have met his first and foremost inspiration for his most famous character. Arthur met Dr. Joseph Bell, a surgeon and lecturer in Edinburgh, in 1877. About 10 years before he published his first Sherlock Holmes story. A friendship blossomed between teacher and student, and Dr. Bell appointed Arthur as his clerk. This allowed Arthur to study Dr. Bell up close, and see his legendary deductive abilities up close and personal. Just as Dr. Watson studied Sherlock in action. Dr. Bell treated every medical diagnosis like an investigation, and he not only practiced, but preached his method to his students. Dr. Bell once introduced a first-time visiting patient to his class, and inferred on the spot that the patient was a Scottish soldier who returned from the Caribbean not long ago and was suffering from elephantiasis. And apparently, this deducing machine pulled that off with just one look. A medical miracle! The soldier was dumbfounded at Dr. Bell's astute observation. He confessed to a curious Arthur that he had never met Dr. Bell in his life ever before. This sounds awfully similar to the BBC Sherlock pilot. This little anecdote was indeed the seed that later bloomed into Sherlock Holmes. Arthur Conan Doyle later acknowledged this in one of his letters to Dr. Bell. The story of Dr. Bell didn't quite end there. Turning a doctor into a fictional detective wasn't just a stroke of wild imagination from the author. Instead, it had to do with a certain achievement of Dr. Bell himself. The professor was one of the first doctors to specialise in forensic pathology during the 19th century. As his clerk, Arthur saw a frequent number of visits from the local police to Dr. Bell's clinic during high-profile investigations. Dr. Bell even provided his personal analysis and insight to Scotland Yard during the infamous Jack the Ripper murders. Wait, you're telling me Sherlock Holmes himself was on the Ripper case? Unfortunately, despite Dr. Bell's expertise, we'll probably never know who he was. Where's a storybook ending when you need one? Are you inspired to embark on a sleuthing adventure of your own? Or maybe just to write about one? First things first, please write in the comments and let us know which other cultural icons you'd like to hear about next.